the entire life of a plant is connected with water. It is necessary from the moment of swelling and germination of the seed when its content reaches 8–12% of its volume. Water absorbed by the plant's roots is used in all chemical reactions, transport nutrients, maintains the firmness of organs, and finally is removed through evaporation in the form of vapor or liquid. To maintain their water supply, plants have evolved an extremely efficient water conducting system and various methods for constantly replenishing water reserves. At the cellular level, flows of water and dissolved substances exist within plants. The direction of water movement in cells is determined by water potential, just as exists on a planetary scale. For example, water in a river at the top of waterfall has a high water potential, so it rushes downward. In plants, water moves from an area of high water potential to an area of lower water potential. The cell's plasma membrane regulates the movement of substances dissolved in water into and out of the cell. In this process, water moves by bulk flow as well as by osmosis and diffusion. Bulk flow is the general movement of water under the influence of gravity or pressure. Water moves from an area of higher potential to an area of lower potential, regardless of the cause of this difference. Water flowing downward can be made to rise upward, but only as long as the water potential created by pressure exceeds the water potential of gravity. Water moves in this way, for example, through intercellular spaces and tissues. Osmosis is the penetration of water through a biological semi-permeable membrane of a cell, which allows water to pass through but prevents the passage of substances dissolved in it. Osmotic movement of water occurs from an area of lower concentration of dissolved substances to an area of higher concentration of dissolved substances. The pressure that must be applied to a solution to stop the influx of water is called osmotic pressure. Osmotic pressure in a plant cell averages between 10 and 20 atmospheres. The osmotic pathway for water entry into plant cells is very important, especially in the root hair zone, but it is not the only one. Turgor of plant cells is the internal pressure resulting from osmosis. When turgor is good, cells' walls become elastic and ensure the firmness of the entire plant. The loss of turgor by cells due to evaporation, when the plant loses more water than it can absorb through its roots, leads to wilting. The leaves and stems of herbaceous plants droop. In the cell, the plasma membrane detaches from the cell wall, the protoplast shrinks, and the cell loses its firmness. Turgor is especially important for maintaining the active state of green, non-lignified parts of the plant. Molecules of dissolved substances pass through cell membranes due to three processes: simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and active transport. Diffusion is the chaotic movement of molecules down a gradient, from an area of high concentration to an area of lower concentration. In doing so, molecules of the substance tend to equalize their concentration within the system. Carbon dioxide, oxygen, and water are the main substances moving within cells by simple diffusion. This is because their molecules are small and weakly polar. Diffusion is most effective over short distances, with a steep concentration gradient, and in small volumes. Most substances necessary for plant life are polar, and are transported across the membrane with the help of transport proteins embedded within it. There are two main forms of transport using carriers: facilitated diffusion and active transport. Facilitated diffusion is driven by a concentration gradient. Typically, substances are synthesized in one location but consumed in another. As a result, a concentration gradient is established and substances can diffuse down the gradient from the area of high concentration to the site of consumption. The transport of solutes against a concentration gradient requires energy and is termed active transport. One of the most important mechanisms of active transport is the so-called potassium-sodium pump, which maintains a low concentration of sodium ions and a high concentration of potassium ions in the cytoplasm. The controlled movement of substances into and out of the cell can also occur through endocytosis and exocytosis, processes of transporting molecules in special vesicles. These vesicles form as a result of a membrane invagination and engulfment of solid particles. These vesicles detach from the membrane and enter the cell's cytoplasm carrying the engulfed substance. The engulfment of solid particles, such as bacteria, is called phagocytosis, while the uptake of dissolved substances is called pinocytosis. The mechanisms of substance transport depend on the ability of membranes to recognize specific molecules. Exchange of substances between plant cells can occur through plasmodesmata, thin strands of cytoplasm connecting the protoplasts of adjacent cells. This type of movement is called symplastic transport. The speed of movement of substances within the cell is increased by the continuous streaming of the cytoplasm. Water circulates within the plant in various directions. Two main flows ensure the life activity of the entire plant. One of them, the upward flow of water, begins in the fine root hairs, which are single-celled formations. Due to osmotic pressure, soil water penetrates through the semipermeable membranes of the root hair cells and dilutes the solutions of sugars, salts, and other components of the cell sap contained within them. The amount of water increases, osmotic pressure rises, cells enlarge, their walls stretch to a possible limit, and finally the cells reach full turgor. The increased turgor in these cells creates root pressure sufficient to deliver water to the stem and leaves of the plant. However, the force that lifts tons of water to the top of a giant sequoia or a few grams of it to a violet flower has a different nature. It arises as a result of transpiration, the loss of water by the plant in the form of vapor through millions of tiny stomata on the leaf surface. Transpiration occurs continuously in all living plants throughout their lives. If the air is saturated with moisture, evaporation is hindered or stops. Then plants assist themselves by excluding water from openings located at the ends of large veins, on the serrations or edges of leaves. This phenomenon is called guttation. It is typical for the morning hours when droplets of water are released at the vein ends, in the marginal parts of leaves. Such droplets can be seen in humid weather on leaves of many plants. Such water loss due to transpiration can only be compensated for by the activity of the roots. Water rises through myriad thin tubes of conducting vessels in the stems and branches of the plant due to the suction force of the leaves, with the continuity of these thousands of rising columns maintained by the cohesive forces of the water molecules themselves. Water enters the root hairs through osmosis and evaporates from the leaf surface through transpiration. Therefore, a fairly constant flow of water exits in the plant. The rates of water absorption and evaporation are roughly comparable. There is also such a perfect apparatus in the leaf as a stomata, which are capable of regulating not only the intake of atmospheric carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, but also the rate of water loss through transpiration. This system is highly efficient and operates without interruption. Plants are also characterized by the so-called downward flow of nutrients, dissolved in water, which are produced in leaf cells during photosynthesis and subsequent biochemical reactions. The downward flow ensures the transport of ready-made organic substances through living vessels from the leaf upward and downward to other plant organs. Water is the primary substance circulating from the cell to cell. Plants need it for the main process occurring in the cells, photosynthesis, the primary source of energy, as well as for obtaining nutrients from the soil necessary for growth and development.